So we are recording, and Jim, I'll turn it over to you.
Okay. Well, good afternoon, everyone. I welcome everybody to this webinar offered by the Emeritus Center. I'm Jim Van Voorst, Vice President of the Emeritus Center, standing in for our President, Ed Fitzgerald, who's out of town today. With me is our speaker, Dr. Joachim Frank, and Dean Napton, our program chair. After the presentation, there will be an opportunity for questions and answers. Please let me know if you have any questions by using the Q&A, chat, or raise your hand options that are provided through Zoom. We will then unmute you so you can ask your question and interact with the speaker. We will also be recording this webinar so we can post it to our website for those Emeriti who are not able to attend. I'll now turn things over to Dean, who will formally introduce our speaker.
Thank you, Jim. Yes, we're very pleased to have with us today Nobel laureate Dr. Joachim Frank. He is professor of biochemistry and molecular biophysics and professor of biological sciences at Columbia University. This presentation will focus on Dr. Frank's creative work outside science, which has focused on photography and fiction writing. In 1976, he joined the Albany Artists Collective Workspace Loft Incorporated as a founding member. His photographs were exhibited in a number of group shows in the Albany area. He took fiction writing classes with Eugene Garber, William Kennedy, and Stephen Milhauser, and published several short stories, flash fiction pieces, and poems. His first novel, On Z, was published in 2019. Several of his poems will be featured in the upcoming issue of Off Course, a journal for poetry, criticism, reviews, stories, and essays published by Ricardo and Isabel Nuremberg since 1998. Dr. Frank is a member of the National Academy of Sciences and of the American Academy of Microbiology. He is also a fellow of the American Academy of Arts and Sciences and of the American Association for the Advancement of Science, and the 2017 Wiley Prize in Biomedical Sciences. In 2017, he received the Nobel Prize in Chemistry together with Richard Henderson and Jacques Dubochet for developing cryo-electron microscopy for the high-resolution structure determination of biomolecules in solution. With that, Dr. Frank, the podium is yours.
Okay, thanks very much for the kind introduction. It's a great pleasure to be here, and I was particularly excited about the invitation to speak about anything I like, and that's a welcome reprieve from talking about science. So I'm going to just share the screen. So the house that Jack built. And these are ruminations of science and art and the way they're related to one another. And so first I have a few slides about my science, and then some thoughts about the relationship between science and arts. And then I go on a wild itinerary of an iconography, scientists in contemplation of their work. And then I will talk about something that is very dear to my heart, which is a juxtaposition of image and text, the way images and text are related to one another. And among other things, I'm going to talk about Workspace Loft Incorporated that you heard about, and Prop, which was a publication that we edited at the time. And then Cowbird, which is a platform of doing exactly this, juxtaposing text and images. And then my Frank's Fiction blog and some examples from there. And then some artwork that I put in magazines. And then finally, my plans finally as an emeritus. As you know, I've still been busy, and this is simply because I'm in a particular field where it has become very exciting, and the Nobel Prize gave me motivation to venture into areas that are a little bit more risky, and I will see how it goes for the next few years. Okay. So my science. So in the 70s, the question was, can the electron microscope be used to determine the structure of a biological molecule that exists in multiple copies suspended as single particles in solution? And the answer is, you know, sort of in a nutshell, apply the solution to a grid, blot, and plunge freeze, and use image processing to sort projection images, find the viewing directions, and reconstruct the molecule in 3 dimensions. So here is sort of a field of molecules that you see in the electron microscope. And here's the paper in 1975, where I essentially sketched out the concept on how to do this. It had never been done before. And so here's sort of a flow diagram. Electron beam hits the molecules embedded in ice. We get projection images, and you've seen these before. You see in the micrograph before. And then we identify the orientations of these molecules, and that is a very difficult procedure to do. I had to write computer programs and apply certain math in order to do this. And then by a procedure called 3-dimensional reconstruction, one can then obtain the original 3-dimensional structure back from these projections. And here's an example of the density map of a molecule which we obtained later in the 90s. So here's the now sort of the routine procedure that has developed. We have a sample, we put the sample on the grid, blot, and then freeze. We put this in the electron microscope, we collect data, and this gives us a series of micrographs. We pick particles with a computer, and then we do alignment and averaging and orientation determination. We get a 3-dimensional map. And then if the resolution is high enough, we can, from that, get a 3-dimensional atomic model of the molecule, okay? So this is the idea. And so the first 3-dimensional reconstruction using this, what I just described, was done in 1987. And at the time, we did a contour track of the different sections and put them into a box. So we have a heavy wooden box that shows the 3-dimensional reconstruction, in this case, of the large subunits of the ribosome. And this is now in the Nobel Museum in Stockholm. Here we are, and I'm presenting this ribosome 3D reconstruction. Meanwhile, of course, everything can be represented in the computer, but at the time, this was a way, one of the few ways to present a 3-dimensional structure. Next to me is Jacques Dubochet presenting his contraption, the original contraption, and here's Richard Henderson showing the structure of Bacteriodopsin. And here, just for the fun of it, I show you the three-dimensional structure that we obtained just a few years ago at 2.5 angstrom resolution of the ribosome. And now, if you go to Google and type in cryo-EM structures, this is just one of the many pages. You see many, many structures that are now being done with this in laboratories all over the world. And I just wanted to note before I leave science, just in time, the cryo-electron microscopy has since 2012 contributed to the identification and determination of structures of viruses and the determination of the interaction with a host for several viruses that are involved in pandemics since 2012, MERS, Zika, Ebola, dengue, and now SARS-CoV-2, which is still going on. So I'm calling it just in time because the development of the entire technique after they got started in the 70s and 80s took a while to reach the current resolution, and the very big milestone was achieved in 2012 with the introduction of a particular camera, which is highly sensitive, and then it became what was called resolution revolution. Then came the resolution reached close to atomic, and cryo-electron microscopy became sort of a rival to X-ray crystallography. Okay, science and art. Well, it so happened on Sunday, October 1st, 2017, this was the weekend before the announcement of the Nobel prizes. I was in Central Park with my wife, and this was a very beautiful, hot day, and we went there with our dog, Daisy, and all of a sudden I saw this incredible picture in front of me. I saw the three-dimensional object. I saw the projection down there. I saw myself projected right next to the dog, and I took this picture. And then in hindsight, you know, the announcement of the Nobel Prize in October 4th, I immediately remembered that picture. It was almost a premonition of getting this highest award. But at the same time, you can think of this as bringing science and art together. And in fact, I sent this picture to the Nobel media when they asked me to send something that was sort of idiosyncratic, and it was then immediately published. So I would say this whole thinking, this visual thinking that I think is my forte, is also influenced by discovering people like Rudolf Arnhem, his book Visual Thinking. I read his book, and he criticizes the assumption that language goes before perception. And for Arnhem, the only access to reality we have is through our senses. Arnhem also argues that perception is strongly identified with thinking, and that artistic expression is another way of reasoning. And so this very much resonates in me. The other one is Edward Tufte, and he is noted for his writings on information design, and he is noted as a pioneer in the field of data visualization. And he has written books that have been incredibly influential. They had many examples of beautiful ways of bringing information directly to the forefront. And one of his famous data visualization is about Napoleon's invasion of Russia, and what you see is the numbers of troops is indicated by the thickness of this, and at the same time we see the geographic movement, and we also see the temperature at the same time. You can see that the number of troops thins out because of the incredible cold in Russia, and only a trickles of these made their way back to Paris. And then another influential person is Johann Wolfgang von Goethe. His Denken in Gleichnissen, or thinking in metaphors, is really very well known, and he essentially discovered that in himself, and he has written about this. And you can see this in all his work, both in his work as a writer, as well as his work in science. So science and art, both science and art can be seen as means to put order into a chaotic world. Now, our world is already chaotic because it needs to be organized by our senses, at any rate, because the sensory input is not ordered at all. But then on top of it, the world, as we see it, can be chaotic, even more so chaotic because of war and because of war. So my World War II experience as a young boy was to see disorder on a grand scale. Now, this is not a picture of me. I just found this on the internet, but I can very much empathize with the feeling, because I've been sitting as a young boy in rubble, and it was actually an adventure to go through rubble and find all kinds of exciting things. But my first experience with war was as a 3.5-year-old already, when I saw houses in flames around my parents' house. So this has been an indelible experience, and I sort of trace the quest for order to that experience. But you can see both science and art as means of this kind of quest. Now, how are science and arts juxtaposed? Well, I see 3 ways of this relationship. One is the science illustration, and here art is ancillary. Art is just a technique in order to show something in science, like Edward Tufte's. And there is another way. The science can be applied to investigate how art is being made, how artistic thoughts develop, and so forth. And here science is ancillary. Now, both are not so exciting to me. But what's exciting is when science and art are directly in interaction. And when we see these as two ways of approaching reality. Now here I'm shown in the Berkshire Eagle contemplating the ribosome. Now this is a very nice snapshot by this journalist who met me in a coffee shop there. And, you know, to me, this is some kind of an example for science and art. And it brought me to thinking about the many instances in which scientists and philosophers are shown together with their work at their workplace. And I found many beautiful examples of this. So we go sort of on a journey now where I show you a number of examples that go from the antique to the present time. Here, this is an obviously not a photograph of Archimedes, nor a painting from that time, but a painting later of Archimedes. Here's Roger Bacon as a sculpture, and here he is in an etching. Islamic scientist and a Chinese scholar. We have another, a monk who turned astronomer. He is an astronomer as depicted by Johannes Vermeer. And he is the inventor of the microscope. Isaac Newton, and he's shown with his book and his and a telescope. Robert Koch, Marie Curie, and Herbert Hauptmann. He is a mathematician who introduced direct methods into X-ray crystallography. Here's Don Caspar, who developed the idea of quasi-equivalence. He is a very influential structural biologist. And here he is shown by a very inventive painter or artist presenting Kepler's solar system in Dürer's pentagonally illuminated sanctum. And so the montage was done by James Claridge. And this picture was distributed at his 90th birthday symposium in Tallahassee, Florida. He has died since. And here, the Wadsworth Center, they celebrated the cryo-EM structure of the ribosome in Albany in 1998. And I thought this was very stunning to see after all these other iconic figures. Here I am again in a Berkshire Eagle. So this is the end of this particular section. And so juxtaposition of image and text. And what is so particular about it? I'm just using staple images, staple examples in both cases. This is Lena, and some people might recognize her. She's been used since 1972 as an a test image for all kinds of image processing procedures, but she is actually cut out from a Playboy cover at the time. And here is a text that is being used since the 15th century. It's a nonsense text in Latin. It's being used for as a sample text for checking out typography and so forth. But this is just an aside. The question is simply, how can we sort of wrap our mind about the juxtaposition of image and text? So there are, again, three different relationships between image and text. One is has a fancy name, ekphrasis, the use of detailed description of a work of visual art as a literary device. And then the other way is illustration. We have it in a given text, and then we use an image to illustrate that text. And then again, the most interesting one to me is what happens if we use an image and a text, and a completely unrelated text, and present them together. Then we see that a synthesis is going on in our brain, because we immediately feel compelled to find such a relationship. So I call it the cognitive adventure created by the juxtaposition of text and unrelated image. So I just wanted to tell you a little bit about the Workspace Loft Incorporated. It existed as an organization from 1976, that was shortly after I arrived in Albany, to 1985. But the real active days were only between 1976 and 1980. And then it existed essentially as a visiting artist series, and also as as a place where the Prop magazine was edited. And it so happened that an entire archive accumulated over the time that was all in boxes. There are many boxes, probably 10 or 15 boxes. And they were cataloged earlier on by someone from SUNY Albany, who she is a woman who was in library science and did this as a independent study project. So you can actually find this on the internet nowadays. But this entire archive is now in University at Albany's special collection. So it's there for 1.5 years. So it's in the M.E. Grenadier Department of Special Collections and Archives. And from the description, this collection consists of mail art, including work created by Joachim Frank and other individuals, documents related to and documenting Workspace, an Albany arts group, which Joachim Frank was a member, copies of Prop, an arts magazine published by Workspace and edited by Joachim Frank, as well as documents relating to the magazine, a scattered run of publication granta, and other publications, correspondence, and catalogs. So it's a very large collection, and when it is, I think it is already available for research, and anybody who is interested should really try to make an arrangement to see it. And here's an example of Prop magazine This is the cover of one of the magazines. This was all at the time of the mail art movement. And so art sort of arrived in the mail from many parts of the world. And an editor at this time, I've edited some of the issues. Editing was quite a challenge. And here is an example where this is one piece that I put into prop, where I put together two things that were completely unrelated. In one case, it's an exploded diagram of parts of which could be some kind of a ventilator. I don't know what it is. It's some kind of an appliance, and it is annotated. All these parts are annotated, but I scrapped the original text of the annotation and replaced it by a summary of a serial of a TV serial. So Ray held Edna and Donna hostage during the blizzard and so forth. Okay. And here's another one. There's the labeled contents of a house. And I juxtapose this and use the same labels to go through a questionnaire. The questionnaire is about the experience of that you might have after taking the drug. I could not control my laughter. It felt confused. My mind was flooded with thoughts. Okay, I go back here. Okay. All right, so this is an example of a very whimsical juxtaposition of these, just to explore what is happening when you do that. And then brings me to Cowbird. Cowbird existed between 2012 and 2017. It was created by sorry, it was created by a Jonathan, let's see, some part here is overlapped. Sorry, I can't remember the name of the, you'll probably see it. So Cowbird is a public library of human experience and consists of a community of storytellers sharing heartfelt personal stories focused on a slower kind of self-expression than the frantic world of tweets and social networks. And he says we use these tools. They are part of our consciousness now, but we also feel a craving for a deeper kind of connection. So Cowbird offers a safe and sacred space for this kind of behavior to occur. So he conceived this as an sort of a compendium of human experience, and one had the space to essentially post an image and then a text next to it. And there were no restrictions in this. And you can see here an entire gallery of this. And then I show you how I made use of this. And I posted over the years, over these 5 years, 335 of these stories. And here they are ordered by the highest liked ones. The highest is this sad spectacle of socks that have lost their partner. and so on. And here's the house that Jack built. So I'm just giving you sort of a taste of these. Here's an image that I took on Martha's Vineyard, and I put it together with this text. Now, these are texts that you could think of as fake news. These are essentially invention in order to make sense of what we see. So it does not happen every day that gravity is defeated by this margin. The balance is so precarious that a mere cough will suffice to bring the edifice to fall. People walking by, like the man in the background, put their voices to a whisper. I did not dare return to the beach the next day. Here's the house that Jack built. It is difficult to live in the house that Jack built. In certain rooms, one has to walk under an angle. Every night I go to sleep. I'm unsure if this might be the night of the final geometric transformation. To be on the safe side, I sent my children to stay with their aunt. One cannot be careful enough, especially in the storm season, which has just begun. We'd hang them up and let the clouds go by and watch them drive from behind the cabin, and would forget ourselves just watching the sound and the clouds go by. And in tonight's performance of Fiddle Stomp, due to indisposition of Rosa Pendergast, the part of the prima ballerina will be played by understudy Betty Letterby. We thank our patrons for their understanding. Hidden in plain view across the country are the relay notes of the National Security Agency. Here's where whispers converge to become rumors, from which insinuations are distilled that eventually become plausible facts. These, in turn, are stored away in underground safes, out of reach of humanity, where they mature over decades into indisputable documented facts. One of those safes is situated in a salt mine in Nevada, right next to simmering nuclear refuse. Don't be fooled by the low tech on display here in the node I found just off the metro platform in Poughkeepsie. It represents billions of dollars in investment. Wires converge at hazardous angles with curvature so high that the electrons taking the route almost violate the event horizon of the Maxwell equations. We should take comfort from the fact that we are surrounded, nay, interwoven with wires and wirelesses alike that lead straight to our army of professional listeners. Who would feel safe without them? Mermaids who have been through thorough training toward an existence outside their elements and have been approved for transformation will choose a solitary spot and with a flick of their torso will shed the tail fin, the single obstacle to their new life. On my walks on the beach of the Olympic Peninsula, I was not lucky enough to catch one of those fascinating creatures at the moment of their water-to-earth transformation, but I found plenty of evidence, fins that had turned green already from lack of oxygen. So far a sample of cowbird, and I just wanted to show an example of an interpretation, a text interpretation of an image, this ekphasis, a part of the relationship of image and text. This is a good friend of mine, Mike Heller, a poet, a well-published poet, and here is one of his poems that he wrote under the impression of seeing a Max Beckmann exhibit in London. And I had the privilege of being able to translate this into German. So several of his Beckmann poems are now published in Germany, which is the first time that Mike Heller has been introduced to Germany. And then I have Frank's Fiction, where essentially I have a blog, an ongoing blog, but I'm also making available all the publications of short stories and so forth as linked. And in itself, it is really always a juxtaposition of images and text, where I sometimes just explore these just for fun. So here is an ancient telescope on the beach of the Olympic Peninsula with set magnification of 1:1. We cannot help but admire the ingenuity of people who gave us this early unmagnified yet dignified and precise vision of our immediate surroundings. The glyphs on the tree trunk are difficult to decipher. It is conceivable that they have been deliberately obfuscated to conceal their meaning. After careful microscopic analysis, here is a rendition of what appears to be an ancient Japanese text. Haru Shigite Natsu ki ni Kirashi Shurate no Koromo Hosu Tiu Ama no Kagu Yama. The spring has gone, the summer's come, and I can just descry the peak of Ama no Kagu, where angels of the sky spread their white robes to dry. And just to finish off, I'm going to show some pictures that again are annotated in a new journal, which is called Hole in the Head Review. So these are photographs that I took at various places and then produced a narrative to this. Persistence of an Arctic flower. The enduring flower itself is not visible in this picture. So this was in the New York Botanical Garden. This is again another version of the telescope, cheap telescope of the lensless type. The functionality of this unique 1:1 telescope is confined to the selection of field, in this case, a balanced combination of land, sea, and sky. This was on Sandy Hook Island. There's a perpetual motion machine in Brooklyn. Perpetual motion machine stranded in Brooklyn. This project apparently failed because the wiring was unprofessionally done. And today, in fact, on today's Valentine's Day, is Hole in the Head opening for submissions. And I have something ready that I'm going to send. And here they are. Do you see anything? I don't see anything. Fellas and females going their separate ways after so much investment. You know, I don't get it. Standoff of two white ravens, Washington Heights in Manhattan. And here's the final one. Meta platform. Some parts of face are still recognizable. This one, Needle Park, Upper West Side in Manhattan. So coming to the end, I have, in the introduction, you heard that I had one novel. This is the published one in 2019. There are 3 to go. One is Narcissus, Irapitra, or My Sister's Keeper, and The Observatory. So I have quite a lot to do once I'm a true emeritus. And it is common to display and give credit after a lecture, but I'm in a peculiar situation because the credit is essentially every single person that I've encountered. But I just wanted to very much emphasize the many people that worked with me in science. And then incredible thanks go to Carol Saginaw, who has been with me all this life. And but in a certain way, I feel like Big Fish, the movie Big Fish, where all of a sudden the memories return and many people stick their heads into the window and remind me that they have been part of this very rich life. So with this, I'd like to thank you very much for your attention.
Well, thank you very much for that interesting presentation, and certainly has covered a long, many areas there, many areas. We do have a couple of people who've raised their hand. We'll bring them in now, Dean.
Okay. Let's see. Timothy Groves, did you have a question?
Well, yes. You know, Professor, my PhD professor at the University of Chicago was Albert Crew.
Ah, yeah.
And my mentor was also Elmer Zeitler. And I knew of your work in the 70s. And it was a bit peculiar because we had been steeped in quantum mechanics, which we were told was all mathematical. And yet, if you spend your lifetime pursuing quantum mechanics just mathematically, we could quickly realize we do not understand it. And so what I learned at Chicago was that science is not just a body of knowledge, especially not mathematical knowledge, but it's a way of thinking, and you have described that so eloquently today. So thank you.
Thank you very much for your comment.
I have a chat from Irene Lurie just saying wonderful.
Thank you.
And there's a question and answer from William McCall saying, looks like a Vermeer. I'm not sure what that related to. Maybe that was during your talk, a particular image.
There was, yeah, there was one. It was actually credited to Vermeer, right?
Okay. I'm looking to see if anyone else has any questions. I was intrigued. The thought process in combining science and art and images and language was a whole different thought process. And I really appreciate that. And I appreciated how you verbalized that. It was quite interesting.
Thanks.
Any other questions out there, folks?
Dean, I think we have a few raised hands.
Ah, yes. Okay. Gene Garber, sorry. Gene, you can speak now if you'd like.
Gene, you're still muted.
No, I'll try again. Okay, Gene, you have to unmute on your side. There we
Got
go.
it. Okay, thank you. The question I had was, can you say something about the purposes of absurdity in science, in art, and in life in general?
Purpose of absurdity. I think we probably don't introduce absurdity. We recognize it, and we are running into cognitive puzzles, and which the label for this would be absurdity. But sometimes absurdity strikes us as very funny because something is intended and essentially not carried out. There's something about absurdity which has something to do with the lack of control. The lack of control between something is intended and it fails in some kind of a whimsical way. But to talk about the purpose of it, the purpose would mean that we produce it intentionally. And I don't think that this is very often the case.
Chris Walsek.
Oh, hi, thanks. I was just curious where you showed us this is my first exposure to this juxtaposition of text and image and how your brain works on it. And I'm curious, what is the usual showing space for this? Do you present these at galleries or like, I know there are newer technologies. You mentioned, we looked at, this is apparently a web page that people go to and like things. And I found the space where these things are presented and how they're presented affects how you view them. And I'm curious, where can I go see, is this a gallery showing? Is this a thing I can watch on a YouTube? Is it a?
Yeah, maybe you refer to Cowbird. Cowbird existed as a platform for essentially posting images and texts together, and they were called stories. So people could post these stories, and it was essentially sort of a social interaction platform where it was also possible to essentially post direct messages among the people. it was very sad when it was taken down. It was in 2017 in the spring. It was essentially, I think, the one who started it somehow lost interest, or he was out of resources because he needed to maintain it. And one thing that happened was that there was all of a sudden an onslaught of postings by spam postings. And so it meant that the site had to be moderated constantly, and he probably was out of patience to do that. However, the site it can be accessed. It has 85,000 postings. They're incredible. They're from all venues of the world. And by very nice, people and artists and scientists and so forth. And so you can simply go to Cowbird and look at the site. All the postings are accessible, but it is no longer active as a site. It cannot, you cannot interact with it. You cannot post anymore.
And Terry Harrison. Hi, Terry.
Hi, thank you so much for this utterly fascinating presentation. I'm grasping something of your path or transition from science to artistic perspectives. I wondered if you could comment on perhaps the reverse path of artists and their perspectives to science. What kind of transition might that involve, or could that eventually or ultimately be?
I don't know. I mean, if you call it transition, I saw it more as a sort of a coexistence. I could not contain myself with pursuit of science. I actually needed some other outlet. That was a necessity to feel complete. So I've done this all along, and so an artist, I can only speculate that an artist might already be fulfilled with what he's doing, and he might not have an inclination to add science to his or her portfolio. But obviously, science is useful in all venues of life. So science is useful in finding out something about how art is made, like the mental process, or you can use it in order to study the paintings and so forth, layers of paintings from the medieval time. So science is sort of a universal way of approaching something in a quantitative way.
Thank you. I'll think about that. Thank you.
Isabel, please feel free.
Hello, Isabel.
You're muted, Isabel.
We are wife and husband. But I'll speak because my voice is louder.
Hi, Ricardo.
Yeah, no, speaking about
I can.
speaking about the relation between being a scientist and being an artist and all that, and it sounds strange to many people, but just by luck, yesterday I was reading or rereading W.H. Auden's book of prose, which is called The Dyer's Hand. And he puts scientists and artists in the same category, in opposition to all other professions, lawyers, doctors, etc. In opposition to them, he says, these are people who depend on their wits, on inspiration. And, there's no way of teaching them this, or, they just depend on their wits. And that is a position which is at the same time very exhilarating, but very, very risky. So in his view, the scientists and artists are naturally together. The others are in a different situation. So that's Auden for you.
That's interesting, but I would posit that wit is really more uniformly distributed than and not in these singular positions. I mean, wit is really very often encountered in other other places.
Yeah, but people do not depend on it so much as scientists or artists do. They just entirely dependent on it.
Right. Right. It's sort of a street smartness.
Yeah.
And I see a comment here from one of our board members, Scott. Comment to you, Dr. Frank. Fascinating, enlightening. I feel as though I just had a visual mental Tai Chi session. Thank you for motivating this emeritus to stretch. And I think that sums it up quite well. Are there any other questions out or comments out there, folks?
Was a privilege.
Thank you very much. Yeah. It was great fun to put it together.
Good.
Well, we thank you so much, Dr. Frank. This was very enlightening, and I really enjoyed it. It was great spending time with you. And to our emeritus group out there, stay tuned, because the next, where'd I put my, I was going to say the next session in 2 weeks will be Dr. Jeanette Sutton from our Homeland Security, Cybersecurity College, who will be discussing a grant that she's working on, that she received. So stay tuned, one and all, and thanks so much. Jim, anything to add?
No, I want to thank Dr. Frank for such an interesting presentation, and we hope to see you all at the next sessions.
Okay.
Thank you, Dr. Frank.
Thank you all. Take care.